New GM Pat Stewart of Nebraska football. Who's his boss? We'll talk about that next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year.
All right, welcome in. Good morning. It is Wednesday, the Wednesday of NFL Draft Week, the Wednesday of the transfer portal closing, the Wednesday of the Husker games week. Lots of stuff happening on the college football landscape. And in Lincoln on Tuesday, we heard, by the way, I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer, 1620 The Zone, decked out in his Locked On gear. I like it. Is here with me as always.
I can't resist a quarter zip. Yeah, it's just one of my things.
It's good. It's good. I'm going with my 2015 World Series champs shirt. So
that's good.
We're good.
Not 2025.
On Tuesday, 2 in a row, 2 wins in a row. Small steps. On Tuesday in Lincoln, Nebraska football coach Matt Rhule spoke to the media, and he got into some talk about Pat Stewart because he was asked a question about Pat Stewart, the new GM at Nebraska, who is going to visit with us tomorrow on the last media availability of the spring. We'll also hear from Dylan Raiola tomorrow on Thursday in Lincoln. So I was curious about the situation with Pat Stewart, or the dynamic, the setup, after reading last week in an article that I would recommend that was written by my coworker at The Athletic, Sam Kahn, based out of Houston. And Sam wrote about the GM position, about GMs in college football. And they're kind of all over the map. So one of the featured situations in his story was about Oklahoma, which brought in Jim Nagy, a former Senior Bowl and NFL exec. Not all that different in his credentials from what Nebraska got in Pat Stewart, who came to Lincoln this year from the New England Patriots. The difference is that Nagy is going to work alongside Oklahoma coach Brent Venables. They both report to an official, maybe the same official, maybe it's the athletic director, maybe it's a deputy AD within the athletic department. And then there was also the situation at Stanford recently, which is really a one-off, where Andrew Luck, the GM, fired the head coach, Troy Taylor, and then hired Frank Reich, his former NFL coach in Indianapolis. So that's where Luck is the GM oversees the coach. The advantage of a situation like the one at Oklahoma, which may become more common, I think it will, in college football, is that if the school wants to make a change with the coach, it can keep the GM and the entire personnel department, which is an important piece in the setup, and then go get a new coach. You see things like that happen in the NFL. At Nebraska, Rhule said, to no surprise, that the GM reports to him, the head coach. This is the norm in college football today, even as the importance and potential influence of GMs is on the rise. So, Connor, it's not quite to the NFL level yet, where sometimes the GM has more influence than the head coach.
Yeah, I think you just, a lot of what I took away from what Rhule said yesterday was how much, they had an idea. They knew that they wanted a person to come in and sort of run this part of it. And we'll talk about more of those responsibilities here in a second, but they knew they contacted Pat Stewart. They targeted Pat Stewart. And then since they identified him and brought him in, it's been like, we're going to just figure this out kind of on the fly. But it depends on who your personnel that you're dealing with is. And there was never going to be anybody that Matt Rhule hired that worked, alongside Matt Rhule or higher than Matt Rhule, right? He is the type of person. So it just depends on the type of people that you have. And Rhule is the type of person that wants to oversee everything in the program and wants to be in control of all those decisions, and will certainly, empower his coaches and his front office, I guess, to make decisions and do their jobs. But it's all going to run through Matt Rhule.
I'm sure that Brent Venables and Troy Taylor at Stanford would like to have overseen the entire program too. It's just, Rhule has that autonomy. That's the position that he was given by Trev Alberts, and it's the position that Troy Dannon has continued to place him in. And it shows the confidence and the belief that Nebraska has that the head coach is going to be the one who has the final say on everything related to football. Now, again, there may be a time in college football, and it may not be that far away, when that kind of a situation is more and more rare. You do see head coaches in the NFL sometimes who are also like the GM, and that's kind of what Rhule is, even though he's not the GM. Like, he has veto power over the GM. If a head coach in the NFL is the head coach and GM, there's like an assistant GM underneath the head coach who then deals with player acquisition, retention, and finance. And that is the job of Pat Stewart. So you see the parallel between college and the NFL, even at Nebraska, where Rhule runs the entire show. So in discussing on Tuesday what Pat Stewart does, what would you say that you do here? That's the we're back to that. Like, it's like the theme of 2025 in all of college football as jobs change for really everyone. Interesting quote from Rhule, or comment from Rhule, and this will lead into a clip we're going to play here. He says, it's important not to confuse personal value with a player's value to the team. And he's suggesting this is something that Pat Stewart is good at. Any thought on that, Connor, before we play the clip from Matt Rhule on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think you have to remove yourself from from the emotional parts. I mean, that is part of making college football an NFL-ish model. And like, you don't have to do this. I think it would behoove college football programs to do so, considering how much is going on and how much of a 365, job it is. But I think what he's talking about is, you watch Hard Knocks, right? You watch during camp, during training camp in the NFL, and you see how difficult it is for coaches to say at the end of the camp, hey, you worked hard for us and we really like you, but you got to go, sorry. And that's what Matt Rhule's kind of doing right now. So I think that's probably what he's getting at. And it's something that is different in college football now.
I think he's also saying that you can't pay a player. You can't base a player's pay on how much you like them or maybe like what kind of a leader they are in the locker room. It's a formula that Stewart has brought in from the Patriots to determine value. And it'll be fascinating tomorrow to hear him, whatever he'll do to go into that. They call it like the Patriot system. And Nebraska's incorporating it. It specifically relates to a player's value to the program. And here's Rhule talking about personal value versus value to the team.
The thing is it's not. I covered this with the team. It's not personal value, right? Like, I always tell the guys there's Matt and then there's Coach Rhule, right? Like, so let's say a fight breaks out of practice. Matt kind of likes it, for being honest. Coach Rhule has to like go in there and yell and scream, enough, what's wrong with you guys? There's Matt, there's Coach Rhule, right? Job. Well, who each person is out there, like I love each person for who they are. They have a personal value. The valuation, we put the place on them is the role that they're going to play and all those things. And so Pat's, I think, is excellent at that. He's been doing it for a long time. The evaluation process, the financial piece. Sean Patton continues to do an excellent job with the financial piece, the analytics piece. And, we're just still kind of working in murky waters because we don't know necessarily all the rules. We don't know the role of third-party NIL moving forward. We don't know. So we're, the portal's still open with no house settlement right now, so it's still a free-for-all. So we're still trying to figure out all those things, but Pat, he's a critical thinker, and so I think when I hired him, I just said, hey, you'll figure all this out.
That was the line of the day from yesterday. Hey, we're going to work through this. You're going to figure all this out. It's interesting though what you laid out, Mitch, combined with what Rhule said there. Like I don't think that I want it to be too formulaic in how you view players. Like I think there needs to be there needs to be some heart to it. There needs to be some like, I think with my heart a little bit more, and the heart wins sometimes over the brain. But you mentioned the Patriots, and that's where Pat Stewart comes from, and that was about as formulaic as it gets. If you don't fit in the value range of what they have you at, we got no problem, with you leaving town. That's fine. So that's a really interesting, thing, and a very, very different Nebraska football than it's ever been.
Is Nebraska set to become the New England Patriots of the Big Ten? Well, I mean, the current day New England Patriots are not what you want to be, but there's a long history that Pat Stewart was involved with, and I think fans would take the results. I don't mean that they're going to do everything the Patriots way, but as far as evaluating players and determining value, there's worse ways to go.
Yeah, there is, but like I don't know. We're still sorting all this out. And it worked. It like so you can't argue with it. But man, it was they really developed at a high rate, and they did what they did, and they had an all-time great quarterback for 20 years. So
does not hurt.
Yeah, that helps. And Nebraska's not going to have the same quarterback for 20 years unless eligibility rules really get off the rails here. So
I don't have the same last name.
Right. Yeah. They'll have that for, 5 to 8 or something like that. So yeah, I mean, that is a lot different than people are used to around here. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a break, come back, talk a little bit more about what Matt Rhule had to say on Tuesday, including some comments about a former coach in Lincoln.
But first, a word from our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever wonder where all your money went? Sometimes I bet college football coaches wonder where all their money went. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. Maybe you're a college football coach and you have spent too much money on one singular player in the portal. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop managing your money and you start building wealth. All in one convenience with Monarch Money as well. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances today with Monarch Money, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. A couple news items off the top here. DeAndre Barnes, third-year defensive back. He went into the transfer portal yesterday. Nebraska hasn't lost much on that front. In fact, I would say that they probably haven't lost enough, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, this is a secondary player who's been in the program. Secondary as in like he plays in the defensive backfield. Player who's been in the program for a couple of seasons, and it's a numbers game. Nebraska has a lot of defensive backs, and too many defensive backs to fit into the 105-man structure. So he put out a nice message, as players tend to do, and thanked everybody on social media Tuesday night, and he'll be looking for another spot. So they're down to 130 players. That's what the roster lists when you add in the 7 of the true freshmen who are still waiting for their arrivals in June. That's a bit more than 105. And I have a question. I don't know, maybe it's like a rhetorical question, or there's not like an answer that's entirely known to this. Rhule talked for another 25 minutes or so on Tuesday, and I was going to ask him about this, but he got going on a bunch of other subjects. So I figured it'll come up at some point. I can probably get it answered on Saturday when we're back there, or maybe even Thursday. Okay, so what happens if you don't go in the portal before Friday, and then you get cut in say July or August? There's not a portal window in July or August. It doesn't open again until December, the way that the rules are set up now. Now, the House settlement might in some way change that or affect that, but I've got to think, Connor, that those players will be able to immediately transfer somewhere if you end up getting cut from a school like Nebraska.
If we're still, yeah, like you said, the whatever comes down as far as a ruling from the NCAA and the courts over the summer, then we'll see what happens then, because God knows still what's in there. But if we're going off of what we know, like under the traditional kind of rule structure, they could leave school whenever they want. I
don't even know that there's a mechanism in place to keep them, and really the portal's there to protect the school more than anything else.
They would get released from their scholarship, and then they would be free to join another program, but as a walk-on, right? That's kind of how it worked with the tight end Markaway. So
I think they could probably come in and get put on scholarship if you have unlimited scholarships under the 105, and the school that's picking up departing player would like to put them on scholarship. I don't know that there's anything that's going to prevent that from happening. It's going to be a totally new situation for a fairly large group of players across the sport this summer.
Yeah, it's and there's going to be a few of them. There's going to be a few players who fall into the category that you just described. They're going to play it all the way. They're going to make Matt Rhule tell them that they have to leave.
You're not seeing a wave of players headed to the portal here with 2 days left before the door shuts. So I think they probably have some assurances, or at least a hint. Like, nobody's going to prevent them from playing college football if they want to play college. If there's a school that wants to give you a roster spot, I think all those players will find their way onto a roster.
Right, but there's a huge crunch, and there's a lot of schools that have over 105 players that are going to go into the fall, and so there's going to be a lot of guys that are just kind of floating out there. Elsewhere, Rhule talked yesterday about Cam Jurgens and his new $40 million guaranteed contract. And how he's the richest man in Gage County, but specifically using him as as sort of a recruiting tool. And then he also, and this is also in congruence with the NFL draft, which of course begins tomorrow. Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmacher, Thomas Fidone, each have made their case to be drafted. So go ahead. Here's
I was going to say some others. I think Nebraska could end up getting 4 to 5 players drafted, or it could be those 3. But the Jurgens thing really quick. Rhule showed the team. Did you hear Rhule talk about how he showed the team some images of Cam Jurgens going back to Cam being a kid at a football camp, and then coming to school as a tight end. And interesting to see the Nebraska coach, what he said is he wants Nebraska players to have this kind of success in the NFL, so that in weeks like this, when the draft comes around, it's in the back of the minds of NFL executives to go get somebody from Nebraska because of the production that someone like Cam Jurgens is giving an NFL team.
Yeah. So Rhule talked about Jurgens in particular, and sort of these guys, this ground of guys that are going into the NFL draft as well. And here's that clip from yesterday.
I think it's very important to say that most of those guys were brought here by Scott Frost and his staff. Okay, so I think that's very, very important to say, and his strength staff and all those people that were here. So, Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmacher, Isaac Gifford, those guys were brought here. Fidone, those guys were brought here under that staff. So I know the impact like Coach Beckton had on Thomas. Just the relationship that he had. So I think that's important to say.
Thank you.
When have you ever heard a coach go out of his way? Nobody was going to say a word if Matt Rhule had just talked up Ty Robinson, who he's coached for the last 2 years, Thomas Fidone, who didn't play under the previous staff. When have you ever heard a coach go out of his way to praise the efforts of a fired former staff that was done in Lincoln 2.5 or in the place where the current coach was working 2.5 years prior?
Yeah. I think you want to be careful. I mean, we're kind of in the in-between zone now where like they played for 2 years under Matt Rhule, but he also is saying like, I don't want to take credit for these guys. I mean, they've earned what they've gotten by their own hard work, and they were here because Scott Frost brought them here. You don't have to be like, hey, because I did see some people, talking about rules and what he's got drafted over the last, 3 years, and at Nebraska. And they were like, well, yeah, that's all Frost recruits. Like, what else is he supposed to do? He's only been here for 3 years. He's not going to have his own. His guys are literally not eligible to
only the portal guys. Only like a Nair, Isaiah Nair, Jamal Banks, Ben Scott, like those players. Those are Rhule. They were brought by Rhule, and
so I think
may or may not be drafted.
I think this is another example of Matt Rhule having an acute awareness of what people are talking about on the internet.
Okay,
and so. Yeah, I don't think it needed to be said, but it's nice that it was.
Right. Not a big story, just an interesting moment. And all right, let's take a break and come back. I've got an update on the media competition for Saturday at the Husker games. That's next. Welcome back. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer, Wednesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Nebraska baseball on Tuesday night went down. I was going to say swinging, but based on the score, that may not have been the case. 4-0 against former Big 12 rival Kansas. So the Jayhawks get some revenge against Nebraska after its win in Lawrence a couple of weeks ago. We are again at the point in the baseball season, sadly for Nebraska, as we get toward the end of April, where these non-conference games really don't mean much of anything. Huskers are still under 500 overall and are going to have to win the Big Ten tournament, most likely to get into the postseason. So they go out to Maryland this weekend.
Yeah. I think there's still some people holding on to like, hey, can we get an at-large here? I don't think so. Just win games on the weekend, put yourself in position for seeding for the Big Ten tournament. I mean, get there first and then make a run.
Yeah. So on Tuesday, after the Matt Rhule media availability, I had an opportunity to connect with Bobby Hessling. So there's a name from a while back on the pod. Remember, Bobby was the what did he do last year in the spring? Like he was the straight man, like the reporter for the little games they were playing. This is seems like a long time ago. Nebraska's doing none of this in the spring this season, but Bobby's still around.
Yeah, so I've seen Bobby a lot. He does a lot of the BTN Plus for like women's basketball games and stuff like that. He was in Omaha last week doing student radio, but then we found out that he's in too deep. He's too embedded in, and we couldn't talk to him for some reason. So what's his plan here? What's going on?
So this is the Husker games. Have you familiar with the Hunger Games movies?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. They have the game master in the Hunger Games movies, the guy who just has like the death wish for everyone. And like he designs methods to kill off the kids.
Yes.
This is Bobby Hessling for the Husker games.
Wow.
I think so. I mean, I think Brandon Meyer in the department, he's the one who crafted the email that we briefly mentioned on the show yesterday with all of the ideas about what Nebraska could do. Could it bring the president to Memorial Stadium? That's not happening.
No idea
on
it's a bad
Saturday.
idea, Mitch. Just throw it out there. Brainstorming session.
Right. Bobby approached me in the lobby of the Hawks Championship Center and said, "So you're ready for the media competition?" And I was like, okay, this is an indication that Nebraska did not take my gruff response to Keith Mann as a sign that I don't want to participate. And I said, well, I'm not really sure, Bobby. Like, what am I going to be doing? And the first thing he threw out, if he's not, I hope he's joking, because if he's not joking, there's no way. I'm not doing this. He said something about how he thought they might have the media run 40-yard dashes.
Hell yes. Come on. You got to somebody, it sounds like everybody's dropping like flies out there. Like nobody wants to do this. And all the media is like, oh, I got something else going. And you do, you got something else going on. But this is great. This would be a great team building exercise. It doesn't matter how fast you run. It's actually funnier if you don't run fast. It's funnier if you don't catch the punts.
Yeah, it's real funny. You know how funny it is? So Elijah Judy, Nebraska defensive lineman, somehow is getting involved in the John Cook roping challenge.
Yeah.
He's from North Philly. I don't think that he's ever picked up a rope before. But you know what Elijah Judy's been doing this week? And Matt Rhule mentioned this. He's been practicing. He's been watching YouTube videos, and he's been getting ready. So he doesn't look like an ass out there on Saturday in front of a few thousand people. We had a comment, and I'm trying to avoid this. Like, I'm trying to avoid this and making it sound like I'm taking this too seriously, because I'm really not, but I don't want to look like an ass. So we had a comment in the YouTube section yesterday after we discussed this on the show for a while and said, "Oh, come on, Mitch, you're taking yourself too seriously." And no, I mean, I'm not, but if I'm going to do something, I don't, what would happen if I ran a 40-yard dash? I'd run it in like 7.5 seconds, maybe slower. I don't know. Like, I don't want to sprint. I just not going to do that. If they get me out there and they're like, okay, now we're going to run the 40-yard dash. Like, I can't, at that point, you're kind of in, you have to do it. Right. So I'm just making a mockery of it. Like, I'm going to jog at a slow pace, because if I run, I might pull a hamstring, I might tear an Achilles. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm being dramatic. I'm being overly dramatic. Like, I probably wouldn't do that, but I'm not going to sprint in front of everybody. Sorry.
Maybe you could make this work for you. I mean, maybe 15 yards in, you just, blow a tire and you just, you roll on the ground for a little while. Everybody laughs. They have a good time. Nobody knows what your 40 time would have been. And then that's it. And
that's a meme. That's a meme. I have a soft tissue situation going on. Like, I was out running this morning. I was, you can probably find video evidence on the internet. And 5:30 this morning, I was out in the neighborhood running with a group
for 40 yards. Just
yeah, and like, I don't sprint. Like, I jog. That's what I do. That's how old I am.
I cannot wait, because I cannot wait to see what this ends up becoming on Saturday. And yes, it is at your expense a little bit, and yes, it will be laughing and there will be memes, but it's I don't know. I think it'll be a net positive in the long run. How's that? I don't think
you're right about people dropping like flies. Like, there were some other, I'm being nice, and there are some others in my position who are not, and are just like, the minute. So there were a couple other people. Bobby was talking to me, but there were a couple others like in the area who heard the comment, people who you might think would be invited to do this. And it was like a hand wave, Like, get that idea out of here. I want nothing to do with that. So I don't know. I was texting on Tuesday with Clayton Collier, the esteemed WOWT sports director, who I think would be very good at the media competition. He's younger, and he's got some height, some size, some length, athleticism. Mm-hmm. It looks like a basketball player. I told him he could have my spot. I'm advocating for Nebraska to have Clayton Collier out there, but no indication yet that he's gonna substitute for me.
Yeah, you're trapped. But as everybody around you drops, you stay in there, and then you get the credit afterwards. And you might have to deal with some things for a couple days, but it's gonna be okay. And I'm always thinking in terms, of content. It would be a great moment for this podcast. We would play the video on the show, and it would be fantastic for me anyway. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm keeping an open mind. There was some talk too. I think the 40-yard dash thing had to be a joke. There was some talk too about the punt catching, and I think that's actually on the agenda. And I said, can they pooch punt? Because that would be fine, and I'd catch it. And he was like, no, it's going to be Jack McAllister. And he punts the ball very high. So
maybe there's an easy, a medium, and a hard. Okay. A couple more things before we get out of here. So after, while the media is doing their thing as one of the in-between quarter shows, there's going to be 4 quarters of live football going on with some of the end of Nebraska's roster. 4 quarterbacks in the scrimmage, none of which are named Dylan Raiola or Jalen Gramstad, but TJ Lateef, Marcos Davila, Luke Lonval, Bodie Sukup will be quarterback in a quarter each. So that's pretty cool. You get to look at the young freshman and the transfer from Purdue.
Yeah, that's worth going right there.
I think so.
I want to see those two.
That's a spring game in a way right there.
I mean, there'd be as much interest on my part in seeing those two if this was a normal spring game as there would be in seeing Dylan Raiola, because we've seen Dylan Raiola.
Yeah. But you haven't seen this Dylan Raiola, according to Matt Rhule. Where's he at from a year ago? He said, quote, 10 steps ahead of where he was. And
is that on like a 2,000 step journey or how?
I don't know how many steps in total he's taking on this, but 10 steps sounds like a pretty big jump, I guess. Maybe it's only 50 steps over an entire career. I'm not sure how many steps there are, but 10 feels like a lot.
Yeah. A lot of praise from Matt Rhule about Dylan Raiola and what he's doing. And, we'll see in August. I think the big thing is just comfortability and leadership, and him being more natural in the way that he takes care of his business within the program. All of that it comes with a lot of challenges as a true freshman starting quarterback in the Big Ten. And it fits. I think it fits Dylan, and it fits the situation much better going into 2025.
Yeah. So I can't wait to see a 10 steps ahead of where he was, Dylan Raiola.
We'll ask Dylan on Thursday how many steps there are total.
How many steps long is your journey? And then I hope he makes a joke about media running the 40 in there. So somewhere along the line, that'd be funny. All right. Updates to follow on what Mitch might be doing on Saturday at the Husker games. We appreciate you guys listening today and making this your first listen. For your second listen, get the last couple hours of draft prep you have in with the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. They'll get you ready to go for the first round tomorrow night. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.